As you all are aware, I'm hoping at this stage, after 2 years of the programme, Caru is a continuous learning programme developed by the Irish Hospice Foundation in association with the All Ireland Institute of Hospice and Palliative Care and the HSC. What we do is we're aimed at supporting and empowering nursing homes and their staff in the delivery of palliative, end of life, and bereavement care to residents, family members, and staff. So, I suppose as regional leads over the last 2 years, we have been facilitating workshops with nursing home staff all over the country. And one of the themes that consistently is raised with us is a grief in the workplace, both professionally and personally, is not being addressed or recognised in their organisation. So this is a reason for today's network on building a compassionate workplace culture in nursing homes. We in the Irish Hospice Foundation are continuously identifying needs in relation to death, dying and bereavement in all sectors and address it then through opportunities like today's webinar. As always, we do recognise and acknowledge that this subject can be emotive for people. So please look after yourselves and each other during the presentation today. So without further ado, I will pass you on to my colleague Mary, who will be introducing the gorgeous Amy Gibney.
Thank you for that, Claudia. Good afternoon, everybody. And I suppose really it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our own stars in the Irish Hospice Foundation today. As I say, Amy is one of our legends. And I suppose Amy, she's a fabulous colleague to work with. And she's a wealth of knowledge and experience in her field of expertise. Amy is the National Coordinator for Grief in the Workplace and Grief Awareness, working on behalf of the Irish Hospice Foundation. Amy's background, experience and education is in mental health promotion and community support as well. The focus of Amy's role is to guide and assist individuals in their everyday lives to stay well and cope with grief, creating that supportive working environment. So without further ado, I will hand you over to our infamous Amy Gibney.
Thank you so much, Mary. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, no pressure now with that introduction, but just to say thank you so much to the Caru team for inviting me along today. I work on a regular basis with our Caru team around supporting people in nursing homes with grief in the workplace. And obviously, thank you to all our participants today for coming, because I know you have extremely busy day jobs, and if there's just one nugget you can take from today, we'll be doing something right. So I'm just going to share my screen and hope that we have no hiccups. So just one moment. So let me just click on present mode. So just to begin, I'm going to take you through what we're going to look at today. And while, some of this is geared towards management, most definitely in terms of embedding a grief in the workplace culture and policy into the organization, I think all staff or whatever role you play within the nursing home, you should hopefully get something from this. For you guys, your jobs, you not only have experienced personal bereavements or loss, but you also experience loss as part of your work. And while the focus today isn't specifically around professional grief, I have put that in because really the two are quite intertwined as well. If you're experiencing a struggle in your personal life, the work that you do can take an additional toll, but equally the work that you can do can provide a really kind of meaningful environment, which in itself is a protective factor. So I'm going to talk about some workplace supports which are important when creating a compassionate culture for employees. We all have a responsibility to contribute to our workplace culture, whatever role we are at, and culture would be one of the most important things in determining employee well-being and impacting an employee's grief journey. We're going to discuss some of the key components of a bereavement policy, and I'll give you access to our e-learning as well, which has sample documents, and I have a little code and a coupon in so that you won't be charged when you access that, and that could be a little follow-up piece that you do. And we're also going to recognise the importance of planning for what should happen if an employee colleague dies and how to support employees and the family around this. And, I don't want to sound crass or uncaring when I talk about planning and policy, but the reality is I would get a lot of workplace calls when, a colleague has died, and in the midst of that kind of chaos, it can be very hard to think straight, particularly because at most levels of the organization, there'll be grief. So having guidelines and plans in place can really help to, I suppose, ease that burden, and have some protocol in place for that. So I'm just going to start by talking you through a little bit why grief matters, which wasn't in the original learning outcomes, but I did think that no matter what, we need to get people, thinking about why it matters in order to be motivated to make the change for effective grief support. So I snuck this in. Clodagh might be wondering about this slide, but I just wanted you to to put in the chat maybe 1 to 2 words about how you felt when you were supported through a difficult time at work. So how that made you feel. Respected and valued. Thank you for that, Sharon. Loved, cared and loved, valued, safe, understood and comforted, able to cope better, cared and that I matter for all. I mean, I think those are really important things. Able to cope better, that's a prime example of how huge the impact is when somebody is treated well when they go through difficult times. Seen and valued. And I suppose no matter what, when we come to work, we are an employee, but we're a human first. And I had a lovely chat with someone the other day, and they spoke about that they treat their staff as human first, because ultimately that's what will make them better for themselves and for others. So wherever we see valuing residents, we should also see valuing staff. Somebody said there they have an excellent support network. Sarah said it, sorry, not somebody. And that you felt safe. And part of also this piece around culture is creating a safe environment for staff, feeling like a human being and grateful and happy. So, I kind of decided to start with something positive today, to say these are the things that people will feel if we support them well. And no matter what, that has a huge impact on your staff. So I'm going to go in now to some of the content, but thank you so much for sharing that. It kind of sets the scene for what we're doing today. Oh, sorry, I've got my emails popping up. I'm just going to, no, I'll just leave that. That's fine. So this slide is from a quote that we got. So when we developed our workshops, I am only one person with my own experience professionally and personally, but we reached out to employees to get an idea of what mattered in terms of grief in the workplace. And that is what shaped our workshops, including themes that we got from academic papers. Okay, so it's all evidence-based. And this is what a manager said. They said grief can split a person in two and change the course of your life. And I suppose fundamentally, grief is about change. And that's not to minimize the impact, but that is to say that a lot of people will describe how they felt changed after that life event. And it is one of the most significant life events we will go through. It is a universal stressor that unfortunately we are all guaranteed to experience at some point in our lives. It can come up in the workplace in different ways, and I suppose the first one here is the death of someone we love, which is the obvious one, but it may also be the death of someone we knew, because at times we can lose somebody in our past who maybe we didn't love, or we had a conflicted relationship, and that in itself can cause a challenge. It may be the death of a colleague, and I'm sure today we'll all be thinking of the colleagues that we have lost, and what they meant to us. In your cases, it may be the death of a resident, which is something that you would experience as part of your work. And this is where you may experience professional grief. And professional grief can manifest either from watching and seeing people die, seeing people suffer, and also supporting bereaved family members. And then it may also crop up from significant life losses. So they may be non-death related losses, such as caring for a family member that is becoming ill, such as loss of your own capacity in terms of physical and mental health. It could be loss of your future hopes and dreams because your life didn't quite work out the way we thought it would. It could be loss through fertility or miscarriage loss. And these are the types of losses that people may be coming to work that they do not talk about. So it's trying to remember and create a culture where people do feel safe to disclose it. Because if they do disclose it, they're likely then to have all those feelings that you guys put in the chat earlier. Um, so and I know you've probably heard this statistic already, but there are between 80 and 100 deaths every day in Ireland, and at least 10 people are impacted by each death. At any one time, I think it's about 62% of the population will be working. And I always find it a bit depressing, but some of us do spend the majority of our waking hours at work, or else at least equal to our home hours. So I suppose we kind of create a culture and a family within our workplace. And social support and compassion are the most valued supports that have come up in a previous study that was done in 2018 by the Irish Hospice Foundation, and also has come up in all of the studies that we read to inform our Grief in the Workplace program. And they are really accessible things that we have at our fingertips in our workplace. Grief is a normal reaction to a very challenging time. Again, that's not to minimize it, but that's just to say that obviously it is so difficult, but it's also what we need to go through in order to incorporate that grief into our lives. So this isn't a grief theory workshop today. We do that as part of the Caru program, and also if we were doing a longer piece of work. But I just put in 4 things to remind us of how people grieve. Everybody will react differently. So I think the importance of not making assumptions about how one person may react to a death versus how another does. One of the examples of that might also be pet death, and that comes up as a disenfranchised grief often, and one that people feel a sense of shame in expressing their emotion around it because it's not a human. But pets play a really important role in our lives. And while one person might not be a dog person, another person may be crushed by the loss of their animal. Another person may be extremely close to their best friend, and that takes a greater toll, maybe even than a loss of a family member. So it's about that attachment piece. Grief takes time and is unpredictable. And while bereavement policies will often dictate that we take leave in the immediate aftermath, I would urge people to say, some flexibility and some accommodations in the future would be important, because in almost every workshop we do, it comes up that sometimes the second year can be the hardest, because that's when that support network can step away. Things have kind of returned to normal, but inside you may not be feeling back to normal. The likelihood is that you aren't. So recognizing that employees will need to feel the grief, but also be able to restore themselves and distract. And one of the ways in which they can do that is through their work. So if we work in a culture that is compassionate and kind, and we feel valued and seen, that's restorative. And if we can come back to work and get on with our work in a healthy way, that helps to make us better, and helps our grieving journey. Equally, if we allow ourselves to have humor and laugh, while they may bring up difficult feelings of guilt, it's actually really important in our recovery to have that. And again, humor with colleagues can be a lovely avenue and an outlet. And then if we don't support people early on, so we call them upstream supports in health promotion, people will then potentially get worse in their grief. And that's where you can be at risk of accidents and mistakes and burnout. And productivity and performance can be impacted. So we do know that in the early, I try not to say stages of grief, but in the early acute phases of grief, people do find it hard to be as productive as they were before the event. And it's about accepting that and working with them on that. But if we have the right supports, we know that then we can avoid them drowning downstream in their grief later on and things getting worse. So this is all the things just to set the foundation for what I'm going to go through today. And then we've recently written a position paper, which is on our website, and I'll send out the link after. But this is the case for grief in the workplace. So it's our position paper in terms of what we want from employers, what we want from health promotion experts and health policy experts in our country and what we want from our government in relation to statutory bereavement leave, which isn't actually in place at the moment. So next year we will be using this as an advocacy tool to present the ethical, legal and financial case for why grief in the workplace matters. And that evidence base will help us to promote and advocate for better care. While you're in your own culture and environment, we know that the government have a role to play in making that something that's possible for you to embed into your workplace. And one of the things they can do is agree to statutory bereavement leave. And ensure that the state is supporting and seeing that. So we can send that link to you after. Just one more thing around the case. Supporting grief in the workplace shows you are a caring organisation who value your staff as a human first. And I'll just reflect back to some of the words in the chat. That's exactly what came up. Ensures your employees are physically and psychologically safe. Somebody mentioned that they felt safe earlier when they were cared for. It boosts morale across the organization. And whether you're the one going through something or you're watching someone go through something and be supported, that boosts morale. And it increases motivation and output. It protects the residents and their families, which is hugely important. Happier staff is and healthier staff promotes, better well-being among your residents then. So what we would always kind of advocate for, and part of what you'll see in the position paper, is a holistic approach to grief in the workplace. So while training might be one element, and again, you'll see this within the Caru program, it's how you embed that into your nursing home and how it becomes a part of the work. So it isn't simply a training and then we walk away. It's an organization, a social and an individual piece. So in order to create a holistic support system for staff, we have to remember that the bereavement or the loss is the event that the staff member experiences. Okay, and I mentioned non-death losses earlier. That is an example. But then the grief is the reaction. And I know some of you will have seen this model in your Caru workshops, but this is what we need to allow employees to do. So that is to be with the loss, so to work through their grief, allow them to feel the intense feelings of grief, know that they may be coming to work particularly triggered on some days for whatever reason, whether it's the person's anniversary, which is an obvious one, but it might be that they just got out of bed that day and that's just who they're thinking of. It could be that they had a dream about the person. It just could be that the feelings are very raw at that particular time of year, and Christmas is one of those times. But equally, we need to allow the person to restore themselves through carrying on with their work and their lives. And employees will move between these two parts, and we want to ensure the workplace doesn't interrupt that, because grieving employees are already in a disadvantaged position, so we want to make sure that journey is easier for them. When we think of organizational and individual change, and again, this would be a very much workplace health promotion focus, and it would be coming from the World Health Organization Healthy Workplace Framework and beyond, there tends to be a focus on individual change, which is kind of having trainings and requiring that our individual employees, build up their grief skills, build up their empathy skills, build up their stress management skills. But unless we look to the organization and make changes there, this is too hard. So there is recently a systematic review that shows individual level interventions, while they do have a benefit, and I'm not dissing that at all, well-being interventions, like things like mindfulness interventions, healthy eating, mental health interventions, it is also essential that organizational change happens. So that would be embedding it through management and having higher level support there, and through policies and procedures in the workplace. So you really want your focus to be here in order to allow for this, and then here. So this came out of the position paper again, but I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but these are the 4 areas that matter in terms of embedding effective grief care into the workplace. So it is your environment, that is your physical environment, but also your culture, which is what our focus will be today. It is your people, part of you all coming today is recognizing that your people mean something and that we want to give them these skills. It is also reflected in our behaviors. So that can indirectly impact the grieving process. If there are negative behaviors accepted in the workplace, it may also be our practices, and the obvious ones might be having a return to work process for someone that's grieving. Um, but it may also be that we practice continuous care towards our employees. It may also be that we have some flexibility, which I understand is harder in your type of work, but we may be able to think creatively about how we do that within nursing homes. And then it's the governance structure. So they're the pieces, the policy pieces, and the having a grief identified as a risk to employee well-being in your risk register, because it is a risk factor. So I'm going to get into the little kind of parts that will impact the little parts, sorry, but the parts that will impact the culture. Okay, so the first one is the communication piece. And I've just put this quote in, and it's from Dr. Linda Shaw, who I think was definitely, she had a clinical background. And I just saw this quote in the Irish Examiner, and she said, as a society, we really like to use language like positive emotions and negative emotions. But the truth is, there's no such thing as good and bad feelings. All emotional states are valuable to our human experience, and anxiety, anger, and fear are primitive ways of keeping us safe and well. And whether you agree or not that there's no such thing as positive or negative emotions, what I want you to remember from this is that sometimes we can move towards a kind of wellness and, almost like a toxic wellness culture of kind of keep going, carry on, sure, everything will get better. And those kind of things can really minimize what a grieving person is going through. So if we look at the Irish language, tá brón orm, sadness is on me. That means that today sadness is on me or at this time. Whereas in English, we say, I am sad, which almost makes us identify as sad on a more permanent basis, or sad is who we are. But I really like that in the Irish language, it's sadness is on me, because when we are grieving, we often experience a range of emotions that vary between sadness, good days, bad days. So sadness may be on your employee on this particular day, and what can we do to support them. So this is our bereavement support model, and it is 3 simple steps. So it is to acknowledge the loss, to validate the person's feelings, and this is where the harder work is, and to support and signpost. So usually I do this on 3 slides, but I was trying to give you guys all of the information that I need to give you today. So I've kind of put it onto a couple of slides. But the first and foremost piece is when somebody goes through a significant bereavement in their personal lives, or they lose a resident that is particularly close to them that they had a strong bond with, is to acknowledge the loss. So we will often hear, and that might seem so obvious, but we will often hear the stories where people remembered when their loss wasn't acknowledged by someone who was important in their lives. And this isn't like to kind of beat you with a stick and say you did something wrong if you didn't acknowledge it in the past. And because we often don't do that because we're malicious, it's because we don't know what to say. When someone is bereaved through maybe more of a stigmatized loss, like, for example, suicide or drug-related death, it is even harder sometimes to say it, because it's almost so traumatic or difficult that we don't want to upset that person. But what you need to remember is they were already upset. So by you saying it to them can actually be quite a relief. And if somebody cries, or if they say, look, I don't want to talk about it today, that's fine, but they will still remember that you asked. You always can follow the person's lead. I know in our own workplace, we are primed to support people when they come back after a bereavement because that's our jobs. But that can be very overwhelming as well. So it's not a case of saying on the person's first day back, everybody swarm to them, because, you might be the 10th person to ask them how they are. It's find your appropriate moment and time, whether that's coffee and a walk, find a chance to have a meaningful connection with them. And this validate piece is where it gets a little bit harder. So when you're listening to somebody who is, you've asked them how they are and actually they are opening up, it's about sitting with what they're saying. And sometimes that might mean allowing for additional silence. And that can be really hard. We all feel awkward with silence. I'd certainly be the type of person that would tell someone my life story in a lift, a stranger. So I've had to learn to be better at that stuff through my work. But I find it's when you really listen and pause, people will speak. Don't listen with a judgment. You're not there to judge what they're going through or to find a solution, because we know that there isn't really a solution to the grief. So when we use statements like, oh well, at least they lived a good long life, at least they didn't suffer, I'm sure they had good innings, all of those things can sometimes minimize a person's experience. And it's not to say that that person won't feel later on in their grief journey relieved that their person didn't suffer. But when they first come back to work, we want to make sure that we're not afraid of the difficult emotions, and that we're not trying to fix it for them. We don't want to turn the story back to ourselves either, which can also be a default. So that can be saying things like, look, I remember when I went through this, and you will get over it in time. Because if you start talking about your situation, the role can be reversed and the person can end up having to almost support you when they really didn't have the ability to do that at that time. So really it is about giving your full attention to them. And then that support piece is the longer term piece. So that's creating opportunities for regular check-ins. So what that might look like is, you know, ongoing check-ins throughout the year, throughout the second year, using the person's name when you're talking to them. So if you're going for a walk with that person, asking them what their mother was like, their mother who passed away, asking them, saying, what was your mother Mary like? People really want to talk about their person and they want to continue their bonds and keep their person alive. And by doing that, you're giving them that opportunity. Being really clear in how you communicate is so important. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. So I won't linger on it, but it's about setting realistic expectations with that person when they come back to work. And equally, if you're an employee on the same level, if you're giving them a piece of information that might help them, try and give it in written form. Like, if you say things like the Irish Hospice Foundation run a bereavement support line, actually give them the card. Because when you're grieving, you're tired, it's hard. Every 10 clicks on a computer is hard. So you're just making that a little bit easier. But there's also the practical pieces. So, while you don't want to always be asking the person how they are 24/7, because they're probably not great. So, I mean, of course, ask them how they are, but sometimes they may not want to talk about it. It could be going out and grabbing them a coffee and a Danish pastry and leaving it on their desk. Those are the meaningful things that matter. And then signposting to supports, because the good thing about workplaces is we have access to supports like the EAP. Those things are really important. Or if you have mental health first aiders in your workplace, signposting to those types of supports. So just to reiterate the kind of active listening and the four kind of important things, it's giving your full attention and really hearing what that person is saying. So almost trying to live through they're going through, but with boundaries on it. Um, Responding to what they're saying without providing a judgment. And one of the things you can do to help you with that is reflect back what you've heard them say. So if they're telling you a story and they're saying, oh, the last few weeks have been so difficult, X, Y, and Z happened, reflect that back. Because not only does that show them you're listening, but it helps them to process and reflect on what they're saying. And then elaborate further. Asking open questions can really help as well. Letting the person tell their story without turning it back to you. And again, that can be done through those open questions, and showing real empathy by walking in their shoes. I'm not saying to walk in everybody's shoes and feel until you've absorbed all that sadness yourself and suddenly you're no use to anyone. But it's just to kind of try and imagine what it must be like for them, at the beginning, to understand what they might be going through. So the culture piece, that communication piece helps with the culture piece. But if we're to look specifically at culture, the culture is that set of norms, rules. I kind of think about them as like invisible threads that happen in a workplace that sort of dictate how we behave, um, and can have a profound impact on workplace behavior. So first of all, the physical piece, time off initially to deal with your grief helps to reduce the risk to employees and keep them safe. Okay. There is an increase of sometimes workplace accidents. There is studies on that, people that drive regularly as part of their work. It's not saying to take everybody's cars off them if they drive as part of their work, but it is saying to sit down and have a chat and say, do you feel ready to be lifting residents and things like that? Are you okay to do that? And a lot of the time people will want to get on with their work, but you will catch then when somebody is maybe struggling with absolute exhaustion. And I know that in your workplace, a mistake can have a greater impact, in a caring profession. Um, Additional rest or flexibility to deal with fatigue. So that might be additional breaks. That might be a reduced working hours. And we do know from our time to reflect study that many people actually change their working hours after somebody dies, and particularly in the case that a spouse dies, because you yourself may have to take on additional caring duties and things like that. And then stepping away from high risk jobs where if an accident occurs, the organization is at a greater risk. And again, that would be working with your employee to establish if that is something they would require. And then that psychological piece. So that would be the acknowledgement of both personal and professional grief in your workplace. So saying, we know that grief takes its toll. We know you care about the residents. So we don't mind if you need to talk about it. We will have a supervision session if the organization can afford to put that in place, a facilitated space to talk about the difficulties of the work, because again, that shows that you've normalized that within the workplace culture. Having a return to work process or adjustments. So the way you might think about a reasonable accommodation process for somebody who's coming back when they're sick, you might think about that for a bereaved. In fact, you should. So it's having things in place to facilitate them coming back to work safely. So that might be flexibility, looking at your workload, looking at your work type. And again, it might be that they may find it hard to sit with the palliative care patients during that time. Again, they might be the kind of person that just wants to continue on and do it. So it's just every person is different. But say, you know what, we'll take you off that and we'll do this for a little while you get your head together. And you're facilitating restoration. Remember when I talked about the loss coping model? Having additional check-ins and line management support is really important, because they open up the opportunity for somebody to say how they're really doing, and it also shows that you are there for that person. So just sitting down, checking in with them, and having that piece around well-being, but also the work, because I understand that the work has to get done and the organization has to carry on. So saying, and how are you for this and how are you for that? Is there anything you need? Outlets to normalize and process professional grief. And I suppose this isn't a professional grief talk, because then I'd be talking all day. Um, but it is having those space and training opportunities, even getting as part of the Caru program. There is a piece on professional grief that we're working on, and how do we normalize this within the workplace, and what are some of the supports that we can offer, and then signposting to external supports when people need it. And then from a social perspective, it is support from the wider team to reduce the risk of loneliness. And actually, what prompted me to do this was a call I had from somebody in a nursing home who actually was so caring to their employee who was based in another country. And I know we have a huge, diversity in our staff base. And actually, they were from another country, and they're a person who died, they needed the support from their work family, because they may not have had the same, they didn't have their family here, or the same amount of friends, so their workplace was their family. That's how she described it. So, arranging something like a ceremony a few months down the line to really recognize those who have gone, bringing teams together to celebrate Christmas, and I know that seems basic, having a bit of fun, celebrating you're having your Christmas party, enjoying your time together, and that fosters morale. An opportunity for collective rituals and remembering for the residents and the employees that have gone before us. And again, things like planting a tree in honor of someone, that can mean so much when a colleague dies. And remembering that not all experiences are equal. So some staff may be more isolated in their grief than others. So I'm just having a look at time here, so I just need to be careful. So, so this slide really is just to say that no matter what kind leadership creates a culture of kindness. And I don't know if anybody listens to Claudia Hammond, BBC All in the Mind, but they've run really large workplace studies on kindness and the impact that has on people, and it is profound. There's also it's called, I forget the name of the campaign in the UK, Leading Lights, or I have it in the position paper, but it's about you nominate your kind bosses. Unfortunately, it's not open to Irish bosses, but you nominate your boss for being kind, and it also shines a light on people that create really kind workplaces and workplace cultures. So I know you can see that slide and you'll be sent the slides after, so I'm going to move on. But just to say, one of the ways that you can really show value to your employees and create a culture of value is all the ways I just spoke about, valuing your employee as a human first, ensuring they are appropriately trained and competent to do their jobs, but also to handle grief as part of their work, ensuring that people are clocking off on time. And again, while that might seem basic, one of the first things to go when we're experiencing workplace stress or overwhelm is our boundaries on our work. But really, we're not very productive after a 7, 8 hour period. So actually logging off and going for your swim or bringing the dog for a walk or going for a drink with your friend is really important. So encouraging employees to log off on time. And celebrating your strengths and accomplishments. And this is the one I would really, really highlight. Provide avenues for people to celebrate their strengths and accomplishments, because people feel good when when it's recognized that they've done good work. So whether you want to do that through like a star of the week avenue or just simply getting together and going, instead of talking about all the problems, talking about all the things that people did well that week. It's a very basic change, but it can have huge results. So your bereavement policy is one way of showing employees that you really care and that it's coming from the top down. Anyone in a top level position here would be the ones who could influence this in their workplace. So what we would say is to put your bereavement policy in place with the view that it is more than just leave entitlements. I'm giving you the best practice, but I know that you'll have to adapt this within your own context, and not everything is always possible. So you may have to be creative. Consult with your employees, and particularly employees in your settings where we have people from all types of backgrounds, all nationalities, for an effective and inclusive policy, because we don't all have the Irish traditions of grieving, and we want to ensure we don't discriminate on a religious point of view, or on an ethnicity point of view. So before you develop your policy, consult with your employees. Make sure to write your policy in accessible and plain English. The amount of times I've read a workplace policy that I have to Google words for, and when somebody is bereaved and they're looking at the policy, we really don't want them having to read complex language. It also means that anyone with a learning disability or with dyslexia has a fair chance of engaging with that policy. Your policy principles are that you want to be fair and equitable. When I say equitable, it means that some people may need additional support in their grief. So, for example, somebody that already is struggling with financial deprivation, they are already disadvantaged through grieving, through losing someone they love, but then they may be further disadvantaged through the financial difficulties they're experiencing. So they may require additional support. One of the things we have is there's a once-off payment that you can get from the government to help people pay for funerals that people aren't aware of. I don't know the correct word for it, but that again is something that you could signpost your employees to. Link in with your other policies, so your well-being policy, your carers policy, and your sick leave policy. If you really want to go the extra mile, it's actually really good to have a miscarriage and a fertility policy. And I know that the Miscarriage Association of Ireland have great resources around that. Remind me, and I'll include the links. And ensure you have a time frame for reviewing your policy. A policy that sits on a shelf that no one reads is no good. And if you really have the time, collect data on bereavement and sick leave, because when you bring people back to work too early, you can guarantee that there'll be sick leave later on down the line, and bereavement leave is often masked within that. So the kind of key elements of your policy is, first of all, what is your employee entitled to in the workplace? They're the days off, Don't assume relationships. So while you may be required to say for an immediate family they get this many days, and for a non-immediate family member they get this many days. Again, that's where that flexibility piece comes into your policy. If someone is really, really upset because their mother-in-law died, like that pain isn't going nowhere. So by ignoring it, we're just disenfranchising it. And make the request and approval process easy and put this in your policy. So for example, if I want leave, I refer it to my manager who then goes to HR, whatever it is. Um, have a return to work section in it. So those check-in and supports, workload duties and flexibility. Don't say things to your employee like, sure, look, just do what you can. Because if you're still asking them for their report on Friday, there's a mismatch between what you expected from them and what they may have expected. And again, I mentioned they may need to move to a less emotionally difficult situation for a short period of time to get them back up to a point when they can do the harder work. Support and signposts. So have the list of those organizations in your policy. Reference in your policy that you have an organizational plan around when a colleague dies, but you don't need to put that plan in your policy. It wouldn't really be appropriate. And I'll go through that in a moment. And I have a guide called the Responding to Suicide Guide, and that is really good for people that maybe lose colleagues in more traumatic situations, and we will give you access to that as well. Um, Ensure reference privacy and confidentiality. We want to encourage people to talk about their loss, but they may not want to. It would be good if they did, because then we can support them, and it means they'll be safe in their work. But we also have to respect them. And then have a commitment in your policy to a supportive workplace culture. And that might be through well-being initiatives, through anti-stigma campaigns, and through bereavement initiatives. I've gotten is it the 10-minute warning, Clodagh? Okay, good. So I'm into the next section now, which is great. So this is the code. We set up a coupon the other day, my wonderful colleague Dorota did, and we tested it, so it should work. But if you have any problems, you can email my email, which will be on the last slide, our workplace email, and myself or Dorota will pick it up. But this is self-directed learning at your own pace and includes sample policy, and documents. Please ignore that we still have the COVID-19 piece in that. We are looking at removing that next year, and making those e-learning modules a little bit more accessible for people, because they are something that you could avail of for your staff as well. So finally, I'm going to go through planning for when a colleague dies. So what you might have is your policy here, and then here, a procedure or a plan or guidelines for when a colleague dies. I'd almost call it guidelines, because what we want to ensure is that there is some flexibility around it, but the people understand and know what to do when that happens. I was only in a workplace, what day are we? Sorry, I was only in a workplace yesterday morning, and very, very sadly, a colleague had died by suicide, and that was last February. It was a male-dominated profession, and my God, was there still so much emotion in the room over that colleague, and I just think if we can show that our colleagues matter and our colleagues who die matter, we're showing that they're human first. And I suppose it's one of the most important things in life, isn't it? It's life and death, and it's saying you matter to us, the colleagues have gone before matter to us. So while the working environment is a professional one, the death of a colleague is a personal situation. And we did an exercise on Mentimeter at one of our acute networks. And this was with hospital staff. And we asked them how they felt when their colleague died. And every single one of them put in an emotion or something that was personal, So care, empathy, and compassion are your vital tools, okay? You're going to use some of the things I already spoke about, so that's what you use. But plan ahead for all eventualities. So do have a plan in place should a suicide in the workplace occurs. And you can use the suicide in the workplace guide that we have to do that. It was developed in partnership with the National Office of Suicide Prevention, with people with lived experience of suicide, and my predecessor Breffney put a huge amount of work into that. So it really provides such concrete information on planning ahead should a colleague die by suicide or become bereaved by suicide. I've used it on calls, and it has very tangible pieces in it. So I just took this out of a study I read, and I thought it was a great way of describing what can happen when a colleague dies. So this person's colleague died, and when they got home from work, their husband asked them how they were. So they said, one day I came home heavy with grief, and my spouse asked, how was my day? I said I spent my day erasing my friend. And I just thought that was really symbolic. So, one of the things that can happen when a colleague dies is that there are different things that have to come into place, right? So, their access to systems might need to be erased. And this is actually what this person was talking about. You may need to re-recruit for their role. You may need to talk about who takes on their workload. If we don't talk about the impact of that person, what they meant to us, and provide an avenue, really what we're saying is you're just a number. So we want to make sure we carry out those duties with compassion, even so much as giving people a heads up when you're re-recruiting for that role and saying, we know this might be hard because, this person worked for how many years in the role. And so we wanted to give you a heads up. We also want you to welcome the new person and letting the new person know that they're coming into a role where someone died. They're all forward thinking, proactive steps that can really make a difference. I'm just giving you this story to highlight it's a story I just came up with, to be honest, but it's to highlight the person before I go into what you can do. So, Magda worked as an administrator at a nursing home for over 20 years and was a dear colleague and friend to many in her workplace. She died suddenly one evening, and you, her manager, the reason I'm saying manager is because the managers will be responsible for putting these plans in place. You, her manager, received, and you may often be the one to get the call, received the difficult news from her family. You are shocked and extremely sad, and must also consider how to break this news not only to her colleagues, but to the residents. Magda was the type of person who put everybody else's needs ahead of her own and took the time to get to know each and every one of her peers. She was often the first face that colleagues saw when they arrived at work and would greet everyone with the friendliest smile. Because she worked on the reception desk, many of the patients and the families knew her very well. She loved hiking in the Wicklow Mountains with her wife and their dog Chuck, who she often talked about. Okay. So when Magda's gone, there's a space at her desk where she's no longer there. And in a way, it's different to when you grieve in your personal life, because while you may go to Magda's funeral, you're not part of those grieving rituals in the same way. So it can be really kind of confronting when we return to work and our peer is gone, especially when our workplace may be our own healing environment to get away from whatever's going on in our personal lives. So I would usually do this in a number of slides at a workshop, but I'm trying to give you uh, a kind of short space because I got the 10-minute warning there. So first of all, plan. So when you get the news, I would say take stock yourself. Take a little bit of time to process that information. I know you'll need to jump into action, obviously, kind of sooner rather than later, but try and take a moment to just reflect on the magnitude. Ask yourself, are you the right person to lead on this? I always think that the workplace is made up of lots of people, and some people will be having harder times than others. And if you yourself have just been bereaved, you may not be best placed to be the one contacting everybody. It certainly isn't appropriate for somebody at a non-management level, and I have heard of that happening, to be responsible for contacting employees about that death, about the death of a colleague. It needs to be coming from management. Consult with the HR or the Don to make a plan. So I would advise getting people together, the key people, the HR, the director of nursing, you, the manager, probably the other managers, and making a plan for who will do what and sharing the load. Okay. Consider all the stakeholders, the employees, the residents, and the family, and also suppliers and people you work with on a regular basis or contractors, and ask yourself if is this a traumatic situation, because then critical incident things need to come into play. I'm talking about this as if it isn't, though, okay? Your communications are so important. So appoint a person, which oftentimes would be the manager, because they would be the person who would have known the colleague the best. And they would be the person who might actually want to take on that role. So you need to engage with Magda's family on a really compassionate way. Would you believe that sometimes this may not happen? And I know a nursing home is a small, tight-knit community, but in larger workplaces, that has fallen short at times. We want to make sure the family are looked after. Don't have multiple people looking after them. Assign one and someone in their place should they become ill. Make a plan for telling the staff. Face to face is best. And I know the residents still have to be cared for, so you may have to do that on a kind of on a group to group basis and involve each manager on each floor to do that. Practice ongoing compassion, so that acknowledge, validate, and support model. Communicate only what Magda's family want you to communicate. So you'll have asked them that when you're on the phone. Now, RIP shows funerals in a public way, so it tends to be quite public. And again, a lot of the time the family want that represented. So usually it's fine. But if if somebody died suddenly, don't focus on the way in which they died. Be clear about how they died so people aren't guessing and worrying more. But again, then start to focus on the person and the grieving rituals around it. And make a plan for how you'll tell sorry, I meant to write residents in brackets there. They're not external, but I mean make a plan for how you'll tell the other stakeholders, the residents, any suppliers. So ensure that people don't post on social media, because while, I'm not a social media person, others may be, and that's their outlet. But we don't want someone finding out that way. We want to make sure that it's held in the correct space until everybody knows. Your bereavement leave policy should kick in for immediate colleagues. And again, I know that you can be struggling in nursing homes on a staffing level, but if there is some compassion we can show the really close colleagues, that means that we're likely to keep them safe, and the residents safe. Involve Magda's family and or staff in packing up their belongings. That is such a lovely thing to do. And you can also bring the family in later on down the line, show them where Magda worked, tell them what a great job Magda did. We have a lovely little sunflowers you can display on the wall where you can get staff to write nice things about Magda and then give that to the family, you know. Um, Practice ongoing sensitivity and keep Magda's memory alive. I'm going to stop talking soon, but just to say, you want to ensure that staff can continue their bonds with Magda, so who she was as a person, as a co-worker, and let her memory live on. That might be that remembrance ceremony at work, collective reflection or rituals. And again, for all colleagues that die, we don't want one colleague to be remembered and another colleague not to be. And we're coming into the next section with our wonderful arts colleagues, but when words fail us, you could have a creative activity in your nursing home to just bring people together, and you'll find lovely organic conversations will come up, and it might be in memory of someone. This is the guide I was talking about. And while it does very much focus on suicide and death, it also does highlight what I mentioned around planning. So you may apply that to planning ahead in the event a colleague dies. I'm always available if you need to have a follow-up or if a colleague dies. Your Caru crew will be your first port of call because they can give you the time, and also you'll be doing this through Caru. And you have our BSL bereavement support line, our e-learning. And thank you so much, everyone. I'm sick of the sound of my own voice, so I'm looking forward to hearing from somebody else.
We'll never be sick of hearing from you, Amy.
Thank you so, so much, Amy. Huge amount of information there in such a short space of time. As you said at the beginning, if people even got a tiny bit of a nugget from that presentation and brought it back to their organisation, then we've done our job and you've done your job well, as you always do, Amy. Like I say, anybody who has any questions, just stick it in the chat. If we do get a chance after the next section to get back to them, we will. If not, we will forward them on to Amy and she will get back to anything that's specific to grief in the workplace. So we'll just move on because I'm aware of time. Our next section is going to be talking about the seed grants in relation to the Caru programme that we recently have been facilitating. So I'm going to introduce another one of our fabulous IHF colleagues. Her name is Elizabeth Hutchison. She's one of our arts and cultural engagement team in the organisation. She holds a master's in screenwriting for film and television. Prior to joining the IHF, she created a TV drama series optioned by Warner Brothers and J.J. Abrams, which I only found out recently. She won a place at the 2016 TV3 Writers Academy and also wrote for Red Rock TV crime series, if anybody remembers that, in 2017. So one of her favorite parts of the job in doing with the IHF is helping to tell the story of how creativity can be used to address the impact of dying, death, grief, and loss on individuals and communities. So without further ado, I'll introduce Elizabeth, and she will give you a quick rundown on our seed grants.
Hey, afternoon, everybody. That sounds very impressive. Basically, I scratched out a living as an artist for many years and then found my way into the Irish Hospice Foundation. I'm just going to share my screen. Try. Oh, yeah, there we go. Is that happening? Start again. Now, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes? Great. So yes, my name is Elizabeth Hutchinson and I'm part of a two-person team with the Arts and Cultural Engagement Programmes in Irish Hospice Foundation. And myself and my boss, Dominic Campbell, we produce arts and cultural engagement programmes around the country. We started mid-pandemic when obviously death, dying, grief and loss was on everybody's minds, with some small amount of funding from Creative Ireland. Since then, we've grown and we've engaged with thousands of people face to face in around 80 projects around the country. Each of our projects is co-designed, personally mentored, and most are filmed. And just going, it links into what Amy was talking about. So what we do is we've various programs, but one of our flagship ones is our Compassionate Culture Network, where we invite people in. We put a local artist in a local facility in a village, town, or a city, and invite people in to come in and talk about dying, death, grief, and loss. And but they also to do something creative around that. And so within that, then the goal is to the experience of art and the production of art. It's not art therapy, although the benefits can be very therapeutic. And it's a very gentle, accessible, compassionate way for people to be supported during times of grief. So getting to the grants, just to where the inspiration came from. Last year, we did an artist in residence in service to people at end of life project. And basically that was, we put an artist into an acute setting in St. Luke's Hospital in Kilkenny. And she was there just to facilitate people who were terminal ill to do something creative. And as with all our projects, you know, artists are amazing. They are natural listeners. They absorb, they empathize, and seeing your grief reflected while you're doing something, making something in another person, but also where you can talk, not talk, and just conversations happen naturally. And then to do something tangible about that brings with it healing and resilience and lots of good stuff. But the most things is conversations. Within this project, it was quite mind-blowing for everybody. Patients found themselves as people again. They were no longer patients, they were people. And medics found people, not patients. And everything kind of changed. And as consultant geriatrician, Dr. Rory McGovern says, people suddenly felt smiling again. And it was staff, it wasn't just residents or patients. I mean, this project was all around but it was also the effect it had on staff, the staff caring for these people who were at end of life. And naturally, you have relationships. And as one of the comments said, you know, working in a caring environment in nursing homes, the same in hospitals and acute settings, we become friends. And that's a grief when that person dies. And so that led us to this year with Caru. And in talking about what we would do this year, aligning what we do with Caru's ambition for quality improvement in the culture of care. And as I said before, it's a gentle way of supporting people and allowing them to figure out their own way to learning to live with the grief, or just the act of being able to talk about it again. And we would be able to then, you know, acknowledge, support, validate, and signpost if necessary. So we used what we learned from the Compassionate Culture Network and another of our programs, which was C Grants, which is where we microfinancing, funding an artist to do something tangible around death, dying, grief and loss. And it could be anything. And it was very much exploratory and a bit of experimental. People are allowed to fail, inverted commas, but try something and do it again and see what happened. And so we issued a call out to offering artists C Grants to do something exploratory and creative in responses to losses associated with nursing homes. Now, while the project was very much focused on residents, we were very driven about supporting staff who wanted to support residents, and then also supporting staff in their times of grief, whether that's caused by the death of a resident or a colleague, or the sort of personal bereavements that Amy was talking about. So we awarded 6 C grants in June 2024. We had a huge number of applications, and it was a rigorous selection process to match the nursing home with the artist. And the ones we awarded, they were a cross-section of activity coordinators, artists, educators, academics, and nursing homes. And then the sort of things that they wanted to do was run workshops or do something with residents using song, drama, poetry, movement, mosaics, painting, and memorabilia, doing something around legacy. And all of our projects, like with most of our projects, but all 6 were filmed and documented. So what happened when we asked artists and get residents to come into a room and do something creative and talk about dying, death, grief and loss, and also end-of-life planning? Well, the short answer is the floodgates opened and we gave voice. I say we, I mean everybody that we worked with, the Caru regional leads, the nursing home staff, the residents, their relatives, the artists, most importantly, and should never be underestimated how much courage it takes for somebody to go into a room with a group of people and ask them to talk about their experiences of dying, death, grief and loss. And because people will talk about what they want to talk about and nobody knows what that's going to be. And through this project, it was, and even though I'm facilitating and supporting it at a distance, because with all our projects, we mentor continuously to ensure that they are fully supported and whatever they need in terms of supports. And we also do some training around them and help them develop the project. But what happened was we gave voice to the residents and the staff, and we all learned from each other about dying, our experiences of dying, death, grief and loss. But most particularly was resilience and the residents' experience of how they, you know, some, if you watch the films, and I would encourage you to do so, the stories that came out were just so amazingly powerful. And going back to everything that Amy was talking about, you know, somebody was asked to talk about, you know, a significant loss in their life. They didn't hesitate to talk. And they could be talking about the death of their mother 50 years ago, the death of a child, and every type of grief and loss. And we had, so ultimately it boiled down to, as with all our projects, we get an artist, they have an idea to do something creative. We put them into a setting, wherever that setting is. And once they start making something, you know, the act of crafting, it settles the mind, creativity opens the spirit. We just naturally feel looser and a bit happier. We're doing this with people who care about us, and it builds friendships, enhances all the feelings of well-being. And in terms of nursing homes, it's until the end, and help programs like this, if they live well until the end, it impacts how we all grieve, staff particularly, relatives particularly, and also the other residents. Because one of the things that we kind of thought about, and yeah, we knew all this, but you know, projects are designed on paper and they're made by people. And it was the residents and staff who made this. And so that is enough about me, because what I really, really want to do about our programs, and that's only a taster. And as I say, all our projects were filmed. The 6 films will be up on the website over the coming days. And if there's the time at the end, and I would really hope 1 or 2 of you would like to think about doing this yourself, I'll hopefully talk a little bit where you might be able to find funding. and finding an artist and how to set up a project similar, which we will be only too happy to help. We don't have any funding at the moment, but that might change. So I'm going to introduce you to two seed grant projects that were funded through this programme, where they use creative practice in nursing homes specifically for community building that involved the staff, the residents and the volunteers. So one of these was Michelle Clifford, whom some of you probably know. Oh, and just one thing. Yes, divorce. Every kind of grief came up in conversations. One of the comments, somebody there quite rightly said divorce is a form of grief, and if I had 10 hours. But the chaplain, then there was another comment that, the chaplain is there, and absolutely, but who supports the chaplain? So Michelle Clifford, who'll be able to tell you lots more about this. She's the activities coordinator with Milford Nursing Home, part of Milford Care Centre in Limerick. And she applied for a seed grant to form a residents' choir to nurture community building at Milford. And it was very clear it has to be the residents. And her motivation, like I'm sure most of you, if not all of you here, came from what more could we do for our residents? We care about our residents, and more can and should be done. And our thinking then as well was, what more could we do for staff who are supporting the resident? And it just will all feed into itself. So she set this up and led by a music therapist. And the selection of songs were made by the residents always to kind of, draws on memories and then open up conversations that would just happen naturally. And then the second person is Rebecca Strain, who's a highly experienced, socially engaged artist facilitator whom we've worked with previously. And she, with the residents and staff, ran some workshops at Brindley Manor in Donegal to create a ceramic artwork for installation in the garden. So, and as I say, might come back to me later if we have time. Now, I think that's over to you, Mary.
Yep, thanks a million. So just in terms of Michelle, I suppose our kind of relationship, Michelle, probably started, it was back in February, I think, when we started the Caru workshops down in the Milford Care Centre. So I suppose for the purpose of today, Michelle, maybe you might just give people who are listening in an insight as to maybe your role, a bit about yourself, and really about the project that you developed, because it is amazing. So I'll hand the floor over to you, Michelle.
Okay, my name is Michelle Clifford. I'm working here in Milford Care Centre as activity coordinator for the last 14 years, but I'm in Milford for the last 18 years. I was a care assistant on the floor before that. We decided to put together a choir, when we applied for the seed grant, just to see. It had been requested from our residents. It had come up in the residents' forum, and it was something, we really wanted to establish for them. And also one of our residents who passed away earlier on in the year, he was very passionate about that. Now, that particular resident, he was quite difficult to understand. He spoke in a very, very low voice. You really, really had to listen to him. But when you heard him sing, it was absolutely incredible. The way he could project his voice. I know the first time I heard him singing, it was like, I couldn't believe it. And I suppose a lot of this and the drive mainly behind this, as for all the residents, but it was for him as well, because, he was very, very special, and he would have got so much joy out of being part of this choir. So, yeah.
And just what were some of the steps that were involved then after that, and what did you do, Michelle, or how did you get it started?
Okay, so we applied for the seed grant. We were lucky enough to be awarded the grant, which we were absolutely delighted about. And so then it was just a case of trying to source somebody to come and help us facilitate the choir, because I myself, I'm not a singer, and it was a case of, trying to find somebody suitable. So I had gone down different avenues. People had given me advice, try here, try there, whatever. And then just by chance on social media, scrolling on Facebook one night, and I was like, oh, there is this lovely girl called Aisling Raftery, Aisling Raftery Music. She was kind of local. I didn't realize she was more local to me than, you know, until we actually met and figured out, you know, the family connections and everything, and friends and stuff.
It's a small one.
So yeah, we arranged to meet. Ashley came in here, we had a chat, and I asked her, you know, would be something she would be interested in doing. She has a degree in music, and she's actually now gone back to do her master's in music therapy. And so, you know, it was lovely for us to, you know, to secure her. I mean, she's an incredibly busy girl. She was winner of Glór Tíre in, I don't know if you're familiar with that, it's on TG Caru, it's in 2022. And she does gigs all around the country, and she, yeah, singing lessons and everything. So she's just fabulous girl. And she's only 23. I mean, she's, anyway.
Yeah,
So,
I met her. She's brilliant.
yeah. Yeah, so we had our first session anyway, and she came in and met the residents. Everybody was there, huge interest. We'd lots of family members in, and there was staff there as well. And we've had, you know, had a cup of tea to start, and Ashley introduced herself. And the one thing then that struck me, or she actually, you know, went around the room and spoke to all the residents, and got their details and had a little chat with them. And the first song that she brought with her was Stand By Me. And I thought that was absolutely incredible, because that was kind of like, you know, going to be the basis, what we wanted to do. We wanted to stand with each other and support each other through grief and loss. And, you know, and so I thought at that point anyway, that struck hold with her.
Amazing. Yeah. And tell me, just in terms, Michelle, when you were getting this project set up then in Milford, like what were the reactions from other staff members? What were they saying? Or could you tell us a bit about it?
I had support from, you know, every angle. Management were delighted, director of nursing, assistant director of nursing, our CEO, Frank, in pastoral care, staff on the floor as well were, you know, quite enthusiastic about it as well, because, you know, it was a very, very different thing for us. Normally we would get music entertainment in, and it would be a case of, you know, maybe a resident could sing a song, or they might sing in a group, but it's not a choir. It wasn't exclusively theirs. It wasn't something to support everybody. And so, and from Eileen Murphy, my volunteer, you know, I'll call her my volunteer, our volunteer coordinator here in Milford Care Centre. She's the most incredible job. She has sent, you know, fabulous volunteers to help us, you know, with the choir. And, you know, just once they, you know, knew what they had to do and where they're going, you never had to worry about them. They just had, you know, things just happened organically. It was really, really good. Yeah, we were very lucky.
Brilliant. And Michelle, I suppose we're kind of looking at the impact of these projects that it has on residents in, I suppose, and staff as well in the nursing home. But I remember, and I do recall you telling me how it had a particular impact on one of your residents that was very, very quiet. Would you like to share that story? Because I thought it was quite powerful and quite.
Like, okay, after our concert, our showcase concert, the final, you know, I won't say our second last one, we're having another one for Christmas. So it was all very busy. There was loads of hype. Everybody was, yeah, it was just like, it's so hard to put into words how the feeling in that room, and how intent and how engaged all the residents were, especially, you know, in the chapel that day. I can only call it like a big group hug, okay? And I remember coming out from the chapel. Everybody was busy. We were organising refreshments. People were sitting around and that. And there was one particular gentleman anyway, and he just called me over, and he was normally a really, really quiet spoken man. And he called me over and he said, and he just put his arms out and he just said, "Thank you." And I got the biggest hug from him, and and he cried. And like, that was just, that was a lovely moment. And I knew from the very first session that we had that this worked.
Yeah.
And this was, I had spoken with Elizabeth at the beginning, and I was saying, you know, my worry was, what if they don't get that this is about, you know, to have conversations, safe space for, conversations about grief, death and dying and whatever. What if they think that this is just going to be great crack and they won't get why we're really here?
Why we're here,
From the very first session, every session, it has encouraged them to be very, very open. It's encouraged staff to be open as well, and
Great.
tell personal stories to us about, their own personal lives, but also, about residents that are passed on as well, and it's conversations are happening in different group activities that we have. So it's all
it's a kind of amazing, really, how I suppose how I think we spoke about this as well, how music is another language, and it does kind of while the subject mightn't always be spoken out directly, but it does bring up those memories, and for them to be able to talk about those previous losses and their own grief, and it's great how powerful it is.
We would have had a lady here who wouldn't go to any music entertainment because even though she loves music and she would listen to it in her room, but she found it too hard to be in a group in case she heard music that reminded her of, her husband and son. So she avoided all music entertainment. She never missed a session in the choir. And also I found as well, we had it gave family members time to spend quality time with their family, with their mom, with their dad or whatever. They made a point of being here on, every Monday at 2:30.
Yeah.
And actually for one lady herself, she signed up, she wants to become a volunteer with us because she enjoyed the whole thing. And that's it's just been an incredible journey, and without the support from Elizabeth, Dominic, yourself, Mary, the whole way along, I absolutely don't think could have pulled it off. Yeah, and Aisling,
Well,
I think Elizabeth was present at our last bit of concert in the chapel, and there was a few good surprises, and yeah, it was just lovely. It was just
fantastic.
lovely.
It was a bit more than lovely now, Michelle. It was a day I'll never forget. It was the most moving experience. And it was fabulous. The music was fabulous. It was just everything. Sorry, I just couldn't.
And they requested then that I know they don't want this to end. And that was, as soon as it was finished, they said, well, what's next? We want to do a Christmas concert.
That's going to be my next question.
Okay, so we are having a Christmas concert on the 11th of December. Aisling is coming back for that, and Noli, who is incredible on keyboard. Unfortunately, we mightn't be able to keep Aisling because of her work commitments, college, study and everything. So I suppose maybe to continue on our Milford Voice journey, which is going to happen. I'm going to ensure that. And I know, from a management perspective and staff on the floor, the enthusiasm for it, it isn't something that is going to stop. We'll find a way to keep Milford Voices going. And I can only just thank Elizabeth, Dominic, everybody in the Irish Hospice Foundation, Caru, for giving us the opportunity to produce this fabulous choir, Milford Voices.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure working with you, Michelle. I'd love to hear more. To be honest, I know Rebecca is waiting in the wings to tell us her story as well. So listen, thank you for that, Michelle, and it's great to get some insight. And I'm sure people, if you want to put in your details in the chat, maybe Michelle, if people wants to contact you directly just to know how you got it set up, etc., it might be maybe helpful for the listeners out there as well. But thanks a million for today. Thank you. Thanks, Flora.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Mary. Now we're going to have to rush with Rebecca, but Rebecca will have no problem with this. Rebecca Strain, I've had the delight in knowing Rebecca now for the last 2 years in relation to Caru. She's a visual artist based in Inishowen in County Donegal, holds a master's degree in fine art and a degree in textiles. She works mainly in process-led art, where the making is prioritised over the final outcome. She's worked with the IHF on various projects over the last 4 years and has been working with Brindley Manor since 2021. So she has an existing relationship with Brindley Manor before they started the seed project. So Rebecca, I am going to hand the floor over to you, and if you could maybe just give them a brief description on the project and how you got it set up in Brindley Manor.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for hanging on. Um, yeah, so the Irish Hospice Foundation had put out an open call for seed grants, and it was actually the nursing manager who contacted me and suggested that we put forward a plan. So I met with the nursing manager and the activities coordinator, and we kind of talked about what we had done before, what we felt would work, when would work. Sorry, I have a cat on my lap. And we kind of came up with a plan that we felt would work with the residents. And we put that forward, and we're really delighted to have been selected. But yeah, as Michelle was saying, it's quite daunting in some ways. And I think a lot of like what Amy was saying in her presentation, that's all really good on paper, and we're sat here and it's like, oh yeah, definitely, yeah, I'll do that. But it is really hard to actually bring it up. It is really hard to actually open those lines of communication. And I have a photographer friend, and she said, like, if you want people to smile, you don't say smile. You ask them like what their favorite flavor of ice cream is or something, or the way to actually deal with things is sometimes in a roundabout kind of way. So I think that's what the art projects allow you to do, is allow you to kind of open the conversation by going in the side door.
And did you find it difficult, Rebecca, at the start? I know you had a mostly men orientated group there, especially a couple of days that I was out, there seemed to be a lot of men in there. And I remember you had said, working with their hands, they needed something to do. And it actually brought about a lot of conversation then when they were not thinking about what they were doing with their hands.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, is that the most of the generation of people who are in nursing homes at the moment maybe really never had opportunities to play. Really, most of them were working from a very young age, or parenting and running a house from a very young age. So they didn't really have as much, say, leisure time maybe as we have today. And art certainly wasn't a big part of the education system either. So even the notion of doing something creative was unfathomable for them. So I would just say, oh God, I have all this work to do today. Will you help me out? I've got all of this stuff to do. And then I would show them what it is I wanted to do. And I would talk to them about because we were talking about grief, death, and dying. I was talking to them about my experiences, and then that led to the staff talking to them about their experiences. And because we were talking about it, I was saying, oh, I'm making a leaf, and I'm making a leaf for my Uncle Stephen, who died 4 years ago, and he was my mammy's big brother. And so, like just using these kind of terms, and then will you make a leaf for me as well? So yeah, just easing it in like that.
Mm-hmm. Did you find it encourages safe conversations around death, dying, and grief? I know definitely the staff felt very safe in that environment talking about it, but it came out in the residents more so.
Yeah, that is the thing. Like on the very first day, because I had been working at Brindley Manor for a few years, and I guess most of the people here will be in their work situation for a bit of time, and then when you're asked to come in and like approach and broach this subject, it's very hard to like just come out of the blue. But on the first session, I just said, look, I'm really nervous actually, because I'm not here just to do art for fun like I have been doing. We're going to be doing stuff around loss. And it was actually hilarious because one of the people there had hearing problems, and they were like, law, why are we talking about the law? And honestly, it was like a comedy sketch. It just went round and round. And then it was like, no, somebody died. And then it was like, who died? Um, so So yeah, I think like to be kind of upfront about it as well, about what it is you're doing, and also I consciously did the activities in a separate room to like the main sitting room. And consciously also we only selected a small group of people to work with at a time. And we also thought very carefully about the personalities of the people who would be in the room together. So that that we would be sort of sensitive to like who might clash with somebody else, and that they would feel safe in that space, basically.
And you involve the families too, Rebecca.
Yeah, actually, it was really nice. We just went to a remembrance service there on Tuesday night, and one of the families, uh, the daughter was in with her daughters, and they were like both young teenagers, and they were being so well behaved. I'm sure they were bored out of their minds, but they had to go and visit Granny in the nursing home, and they were just being so good. And I brought down, well, I asked them if it was okay if they wanted to do some art activities. And so I brought down all of the equipment and everything and all the materials. And we just sat in the granny's room, making the ceramic leaves and stuff. And yeah, they all really got into it. And that was the last kind of activity that they did with their mum. And so last Tuesday, whenever I saw them at the remembrance service, and like all the sisters were there, and they were all looking at the piece and touching it and being like, oh, that's mommy's name. And like, I remember doing that. And that's what the kids did. And look, they put like their dog that they lost up there. And yeah, it was really nice to involve the families as well.
Yeah, it was a fantastic project. And we, as you say, we unveiled it during the week last week at the Remembrance service out in Brenny Manor. And it was just phenomenal. Every single staff member and family member came up, and everybody was touching the piece and rubbing the bits that they'd all done, and trying to find their loved ones' names. And it's just something that's going to stay in the nursing home forever as a piece. So it's absolutely phenomenal work, Rebecca, that you put in there. As Mary asked Michelle, what next? What do you think? Where do you think this will go from here?
Well, I'm going to go back to Brinley again, and continue to do the art workshops with them. Um, yeah, I think like everybody gets a lot out of it, everybody gets a lot out of it. And yeah, we'll do some Christmas craft activities as well. Again, like as Amy mentioned, Christmas can be a very difficult time as well, because obviously we have all those memories of the people that we were gathered with last year who may not be here this year. Or maybe that you were in your own home last year, and now you're in a care home this year. But at the same time, we don't want to like kind of like it's a careful kind of it's a careful balance. Again, in that other presentation that Amy did, the balance between the two of being in the feeling, and acknowledging and accepting the loss, and then also being distracted and restorative. So it'll be a careful balance between those two to allow people to do both of those. So kind of distract and restore with the activity, and then be in the moment with the feelings through conversations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Again, as Mary said, we could talk all day about it, and all the fantastic conversation came out that any time I was out in Brinley with when you were doing it. Elizabeth, I'm going to give you 1 minute to wrap up before we close up, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
No, thank you very much. And thank you so much, Michelle and Rebecca, because you can describe it so much better than I can. Anyway, thank you all for joining us today. I learned loads. Just very quickly, if anybody is interested, I've put the link and the website address in on the chat, or you can just be contacted through the Arts on the Hospice Foundation website. If anybody is interested and they want to think about starting a project, well, we don't have any funding at the moment. I'm putting together a very comprehensive document about how one might be able to go about accessing funding and an artist, and with local level and national level. So that'll be going out to you hopefully tomorrow or the next day, or you can just get in touch with me directly. So thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much, Elizabeth.
guys.
Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for your time today, all the speakers and all the presenters, all of those in the background, our colleagues in the IHF who have been running the chat and handling the IT section, which I absolutely hate. So thank you to all the girls for that. What we're going to do, because we've run over time, we're going to send the evaluation out to you via email with all the resources and the certificate of attendance. Like I said earlier on, if really appreciate if you could fill it out for us and send it back. It just helps us decipher what education needs you require going forward from a Caru perspective, and any feedback is much appreciated, and any cover topics that you want to see covered in future webinars. Thank you to all. Hope you got something from today, and we wish you all a lovely Christmas.
Yeah.